Africa's wildest whitewater rapids are not just an average river. They are living, roaring forces of nature. It is like the earth is tearing itself open, and through the split, water is charging through. The rapids are a kind that don't follow the riverbanks, instead shape the land to them. They detonate rock, foliage, and life alike, plunging into a gorge where walls of stone echo the noise, making the river sound like a continuous thunder. The current charges along, relentlessly crashing with enough force that they can collapse buildings. It churns in thick, solid clouds of white, flexing just enough that it can pull anything alive, or not, under. It drags everything under its surface and only sometimes will release them. The water is raw and untamed. To ride along its surface means following the current, allowing it to lift you, pull you, drop you over waterfalls, and forcing yourself to be humble, for the water is stronger than you will ever imagine. But it is not the water alone that can drag you under. Along these African rivers, there are things more frightening than the water itself. Things that lurk in the shadows of the edges, or hide deep within where mud and rock all combine, to the point where you find yourself wondering what it is that you are looking at. Is it a rock? Is it an animal? Or is it just the water playing tricks on you? But the last thing that you want to do is find out for sure. Welcome back to Tragedy with a View. Hey, hello, welcome back. I am your host, Kayla, and very, very quickly, I just want to address that I already announced this on social media, so if you follow me on Instagram, specifically Instagram, you will already probably know this, but Tragedy with a View is no longer associated with the Darkcast Network. You probably noticed that in just the last couple of weeks, the Darkcast audio on the very beginning of every episode is no longer there. And then there's also no more promos in the middle of the episode. So I think you guys will enjoy that fact. And I've had a few people reach out asking about like the reasons for it. And I don't really have anything to share. Just the direction that the network is going doesn't really fit with what I'm doing here with Tragedy with a View. It's nothing bad. It's nothing bad. I just, we weren't following the same direction anymore. And I decided to separate at that point. And that doesn't really alter or affect this podcast in any way. I've been doing weekly episodes for a long time before I even joined the network. And that separation does not mean that this podcast is going anywhere. It's just we were going in different directions and I didn't want to be dragged along with what they were doing. And so I decided to separate and go a different way. That's all that means. And like I said, you're getting a little bit less interruption with that type of stuff. And you know what? Thank you for those of you who did see this on social media and decided to check in and make sure that things were okay and making me feel like I'm making the right decision and helping my podcast grow in the direction I want it to grow. I truly appreciate having this nice little community here. Also, I've seen a lot of reviews come through, a lot of good reviews. And so anyone who has taken the time to leave this podcast a review, I see it and I appreciate it. I truly, you guys are coming through for me and I really, really love that. Okay, and now that that part is done, we're going to get into this episode. And this episode is actually one that I had planned to do a few weeks ago. You probably heard me say that just kind of with everything I had going on, I didn't have the time to get everything put together for this one. And you're going to see why, because there is quite a bit of geography that's going on here. I'm having to lay some groundwork that I don't always have to do in other episodes. And so I just needed the extra time to research so that way I'm able to confidently and accurately explain the entire story to you. And that is because we are going to Africa, and we're not really going to a particular part, as Africa's river network form a vast and uneven web shaped by plateaus, rift valleys, rainforests, and deserts. Ultimately, it creates several major drainage basins that both connect and divide the continent. At the heart of this system is the immense Nile River, which flows northward from the equatorial lakes region through northeastern Africa into the Mediterranean, historically linking Central and Eastern Africa with North Africa. In West Central Africa, the Congo River and its dense tributary network drain the equatorial rainforest in a circular basin, forming one of the world's most water-rich systems and serving as a natural highway that flows deep into the interior of the continent. To the west, then, the Niger River follows a distinctive boomerang-shaped course through Guinea, Mali, Niger, and Nigeria before emptying into the Atlantic, supporting trade and agricultural sources across the coastal regions. In southern Africa, the Zambezi River flows eastward towards multiple countries, linking inland plateaus to the Indian Ocean, while the Orange River drains westward to the Atlantic. Much of Africa's interior consists of elevated plateaus, causing rivers to radiate outward towards the surrounding seas, such as the Mediterranean, the Atlantic Ocean, and the Indian Ocean, rather than interconnecting across the entire continent. So essentially, because Africa's river creates such a strong regional connection within these major basins, but they are still separated from one another by the highlands, deserts, and watershed divides, these rivers are super meaningful because they unify local regions more than they form a single continent-wide navigatable network. The Congo River specifically is the second largest river in Africa after the Nile River, and it is the second largest in the world by discharge after the Amazon River in South America. Flowing through the heart of Central Africa, it stretches about 4,700 kilometers or 2,920 miles and drains a vast basin that covers parts of several countries, primarily the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the Republic of the Congo. The river begins in the highlands of the northeastern Zambia region under the name Chambishi River, then becomes the Lukuga River, and finally it takes the name Congo as it curves westward and then southwest toward the Atlantic Ocean. When looking at the Congo from an aerial view, it is almost as if you hold your right hand up to form a C. So it is at points flowing northward before turning left or west, and then flowing towards the Atlantic, kind of following the curve of the C. The letter C in its shape. The Congo curves around this massive basin that is covered largely by one of the largest tropical rainforests in the world, making it a critical component of global climate systems because it helps to regulate carbon and rainfall patterns. One of the Congo River's most remarkable features is its depth and power. It is considered the deepest river in the world, with the measured depths exceeding 220 meters or 720 feet in some areas. The river's flow is so powerful that it creates a series of dramatic rapids and waterfalls, especially in the lower course near the Atlantic coast. These rapids, known collectively as the Livingstone Falls, makes part of the river unnavigatable, but other sections serve as vital transportation routes for millions of people in Central Africa. The river and its many tributaries, or the rivers that run into it or out of it, form this immense network of waterways that function like highways throughout this dense rainforest, where roads are often scarce because they're just so difficult to build. Ecologically, the Congo River Basin is extraordinarily rich. It supports thousands of plants and animal species, many found nowhere else on Earth. The river itself contains hundreds of species of fish, including many that have adapted to its deep waters and the fast-flowing rate. The surrounding rainforest is home to iconic wildlife such as forest elephants, gorillas, and chimpanzees. For centuries, the river has also been central to human life in the region, sustaining fishing communities, enabling trade, and shaping cultures itself. Today, the Congo River remains essential for transportation, fishing, agriculture, and hydroelectric power, including projects like the Inga dams, which have the potential to supply electricity across much of Africa. The Congo has over 100 named tributaries and smaller rivers that branch off of it. And while there are many of these incredible things that the Congo is known for and contributes to, there are many dangers that lurk not just beneath the surface, but also glide across the surface and hide along the banks as well. This is something that Hendrick Coetzee knows well. And one of the contributing factors for this is that Africa as a whole has prioritized protecting land and trying to prevent poaching. Throughout Africa, there are several species of the same animal. For example, there are several subspecies of giraffes or cheetahs, and they are differentiated by their spot pattern. There are some devastating populations out there, such as the northern white rhino, where only 2 females remain. Both are under 24/7 protection from poachers in Kenya's Ol Pejeta Conservancy. So while there are still 2 left, this species is considered extinct because the only animals that are left are female and they can't reproduce without a male. Other rare species include the riverine rabbit with only about 250 breeding pairs left, mountain gorillas with a population around 1,000 animals, the Ethiopian wolf with less than 500 animals remaining. There is the most trafficked animal in the world, which is the pangolin, and then there is the addax, which is a type of spirally horned antelope with just under 1,000 animals left. And that just made me really depressed reading that out loud. But on the other side of things, Africa's wildlife is just so incredibly cool and massive, and many of them are only found here in Africa, including hippos and the Nile crocodile, both where the populations are most frequently found in Murchison Falls National Park. But this doesn't stop people from frequenting the water, especially those who are drawn to Whitewater Rapids like Hendrick was, or Henry, as we are going to call him for this episode. Henry grew up in Africa in the small town of Oost, which is in South Africa's Northwest Province. His father was a major in the South African Special Forces, where he worked as an intelligence officer, and he was kind of bounced around just a bit as the South African border war was going on during Henry's childhood. It was during this war that Henry would frequently have to hide under his bed or tables during periods where bombs were being dropped. And he really seemed to enjoy these moments because he felt like he was almost in the war with his father. Naturally, Henry was really smart, but he didn't thrive in school or like structured work environments. Once he had grown, he left home for a seasonal job, and his parents, who divorced, accepted him home whenever he was there. But during one of those times back home, Henry punched his stepfather during an argument, and I'm talking punched him hard enough to give him a black eye. And so his mom kicked him out, and his dad, who came to pick him up, was really angry. And so instead of driving Henry back to his home, he basically laid into him and lectured to him about his behavior and how it was unacceptable. And he drove him to the Army recruitment office instead and basically said, "You need an attitude adjustment, sign up." So after, I don't know how much convincing it truly took to get Henry to sign up for the Army, but after he enlisted, he trained as a medic for the African Special Forces, and he went through a ton of training related to this. He was doing intense exercises. He was trained in tear gas weapons and how to handle certain situations that would inevitably come face to face with him. And ultimately, he learned how durable he was. He learned how to survive in moments that he felt like he was sinking, and he found he really enjoyed the discipline provided by the Army. Once he was out of the Army, though, he decided to find out on his own what he enjoyed, and this ultimately led to the Mosi-oa-Tunya National Park in 1997. This park borders the famous Victorian Falls on the border of Zambia and Zimbabwe. And one night while he was out drinking with some friends, he was introduced to a man named Peter. They ended up drinking and playing a game of chess and just talking and talking and talking. When it came up that Peter was a river rafting guide, Henry's eyes just lit up. He started asking him questions about guiding and the river and everything. And when Henry asked if it was possible to raft the river at night, Peter tells him, like, yeah, you definitely can, especially during a full moon. And Henry's like, can I come? And I almost imagine that he's like foaming at the mouth, ready to go get in the river, like immediately. But Peter kind of reins him back in and tells him that only guides can do that. But by the end of the night, Peter is offering Henry a place to work and learn to be a rafting guide. Just to clarify, Henry has never gone rafting before. His experience is non-existent, but this forever changes his life. Some of the rapids in this area and where he would be guiding were considered a grade 5, which required highly experienced rafters, most of which need to have several years of experience to get to this level to be able to handle these grade 5 rapids. The rapids ran over long lengths of the river. There were unavoidable rough areas where the waves could very easily take control of your raft. There were large drops, and just overall, these rafts were extremely demanding on not only your skill, but your level of attention. Henry was pretty much made for these rapids, though. Within a month, he was guiding clients and kayaking like he had been born doing this. This quickly turned into Henry setting out on his own, and kayaking became his preferred way of travel, so he would cross borders and kayak to go to bars and meet his friends to go drinking. But it is not just the illegal crossing of the borders of these countries that he had to watch out for, because the area that he needed to raft through, specifically the land that he needed to come in on and walk across to get to the bar or wherever it was he was going to meet his friends, was infested with crocodiles. Nile crocodiles are the largest of the crocodile alligator class of animals, which can grow up to 20 feet or 6 meters long. They can weigh up to 1,500 pounds or 700 kilograms and live for an estimated 80 to 100 years. These animals are literal dinosaurs. They can hold their breath for up to 2 hours while they stalk their prey below the surface or wait for unsuspecting prey to come within lunging distance. And man, are these guys fast. They can swim upwards of 20 miles per hour, which is about the same speed that they can reach when they're running on land. And when they burst from the depths of the water, they can reach speeds of 37 miles per hour. They have the strongest bite force of any animal, with the PSI being 3,000 to 5,000 pounds. And because of this, they are able to pull animals that weigh over a ton into the water. Their preferred prey is wildebeest, zebra, and young elephants, but they will eat anything they can get their mouths on. Nile crocodiles evolved into the ancestors of what we see today some 5 to 7 million years ago during the late Miocene or early Pliocene epoch, with lineage being able to be traced back with fossils as far as 200 million years ago. They have evolved to endure, survive, and because of this, their ability to adapt is insane. They can eat their entire body weight in food at a single time while also going months without eating. To accomplish this, their body's metabolism is able to slow way down, and then it consumes the fat that is stored in their tails. We kind of talked about this many episodes ago when Sam and I sat down and discussed hippo attacks, and While hippos are credited as one of the most dangerous animals in Africa's waters, it is impossible to know the true numbers of deaths associated with hippos, though it is estimated that 200 people each year die at the hands or mouths of crocodiles. Many hippo attacks are actually credited to crocodiles, but then on the other hand, there are many, many people who have gone missing and they are just never seen again, which is definitely something that could be contributed to by crocodiles. Crocodiles drown their prey by first getting a good mouthful, essentially locking their jaw and then pulling them into deep water. And once they have their prey dead, they will consume what they want and then store it to eat at a later date. And they store it under like logs that have sunk in rivers. And so there is a very high chance that some of these missing people, not all, I'm not going to say all of them, but there's a high chance that there's at least a good clump of these people who have gone missing in Africa and are never seen again, who were dragged under the water and then shoved under something and they just never, ever resurfaced. Henry, though, does have quite a bit of experience with these crocodiles because on his ventures, especially going to bars, he ends up being chased by more than one. This doesn't even make him question rafting or guiding or just having fun. Because of the change in seasons, Henry would usually be off of work for some time in February until June, and then he would use his time off to go anywhere else to kayak. He traveled to Norway to experience those waters. He came to the United States, specifically in West Virginia, and he was just so naturally gifted that his talents caught the attention of sponsors around the globe. He began working with companies, but like really minimally, and he would only accept gear that he actually needed. So if his kayak got damaged for whatever reason, then he would accept a new one at that point, and he really embodied a minimalist culture. This suited him well because he really enjoyed the life of being on the water, especially while he was in the prime of his life. When talking to friends, he is open about the fact that he sees that there are not many older kayakers, and that is because not only is kayaking a deadly sport, but it also just wears a person down. It's hard on the body. They either step away because they had a good long run and they have other goals in life, or they find themselves in a situation that they can't get out of. Even as early as 2001, when he was 26 years old, you could see that he's recognizing that at some point he's going to have to step away from the water for good. But in the meantime, he was going adventuring. In 2001, he went to Kenya and started a 1,500-mile trip where he kayaked and walked from Kenya to South Africa. In 2004, he kayaked the White Nile, which up until that point had not been done in its entirety. So 40 years prior, in 1964, the person who tried to kayak the White Nile had to skip sections due to a war that broke out along the banks. So Henry and his friend Peter decide to utilize some time during a ceasefire that was occurring and kayak the Nile, the White Nile. The White Nile is the longest source of the Nile River, and it is about 2,300 miles or 3,700 kilometers. But they took on some other sections as well, making this entire trip 4,130 miles or 6,600 kilometers long. National Geographic covered this trip and released a documentary in 2005 called The Longest River. And this brought fame their way, but Henry just really wasn't doing it for publicity. He was really uncomfortable with the attention that he was getting. And so he kind of like pushed away from people covering his trips. But he was also extremely smart. And in the midst of his explorations, he got his psychology degree in 2007 before setting off on the world's second longest river, the Congo. So these trips that he is taking, he is not nonstop kayaking the entire way. He is resting on the beaches and sleeping at night and having to sometimes evade situations like with a section along the Congo where there were cannibalist tribes. There was one section that was so long that he decided to actually hire a commercial barge to ride on because that was the safest way for him to get through the area that was occupied by the Nez tribe, who, according to certain sources, had captured and killed and reportedly consumed kayakers that were going down the river in 1989. This section of river was so long that it would take the barge 3 weeks to get through. So, as you can imagine, kayaking by yourself would be a really big, long risk to take. But with the barge taking so long to get through that area, Henry wanted to stay fit and agile in the process. So as the barge stopped for the night, he would get in his kayak and kayak either up or down river and then go back to the barge, just to try to keep his level of fitness and his skills in check with what he needed. But that would also be risky too. One night, he was about 1,200 feet or 400 yards away from the barge when he hears what can only be described as a war cry. Before he can do anything else, he sees 6 really primitive log canoes barreling towards him. Each one is about 20 feet long and has 4 men standing up and paddling fast directly at him. They are between him and the barge, and he knows there's no way that he can outmaneuver them. So he does the only thing he can think to do, and that is to charge at them. And this actually surprises them enough that they can't get to him in time, and he just kind of brushes past them. But he's one man and therefore in each boat, and it is no surprise that they quickly turn around and are on his tail. He is realizing that he can't get to the barge in time, and they have already caught up to him, and they're swinging their paddles at his head. And then somebody lassos him with a rope. He's stuck. He's trapped by this cannibalist tribe. And he does the next thing that he can think to do, and that is to just start screaming. Luckily, during all this commotion, those on the barge realize that something was wrong, and they make their way towards this cluster of screaming people. The captain of the barge ends up talking with the lead tribesman, and after a long, seemingly heated discussion, Henry is let go. After he is safe, the captain tells Henry that they told him that Henry was their white guy and that they were planning to eat him. So that was kind of like the biggest scare that Henry had, at least on this kayaking venture. Backing up just a little bit, in 2002, Henry met Juliana Burring, who he fell madly in love with. Even though their paths took a really long time to merge, it was in 2010 that they were finally coming together. Henry planned a trip where at the end he was planning to step away from the big kayaking adventures and rafting challenges. At the end, he would be meeting up with Juliana, where they were going to officially start their lives together. They had been doing the long distance thing, and prior to that, they were just kind of like keeping in touch, but he felt like he was coming home with Juliana. So with her moving here to be with him, he felt like it was the appropriate time to set some new goals, some goals that didn't require these dangerous rapids. This trip that he had planned was actually not one that he was originally going to go on. When he received an email from Ben Stooksbury and Chris Corbel, Henry was kind of surprised. Ben and Chris were 2 incredible elite expedition kayakers. They reached out to Henry because they wanted to kayak part of the Congo, the same part of the Congo that Henry had skipped back in 2004. They had emailed him and asked Henry to join them, but Henry was kind of hesitant for just a variety of reasons, but offered to help them plan the route. It was as he was doing the planning that he got more and more excited about the trip and decided that it was one that he just couldn't skip. The 3 set off together in late October of 2010, starting out in the White Nile, where they would spend about 2 weeks before getting out and having to rent motorbikes to carry all of their gear towards the Lukuga River, where they entered the water on December 5th. Immediately, they are noticing large crocodiles, like 12-foot long reptiles, and they came up with a game plan for what to do when they saw these creatures, which was they were all going to come together and pretty much be so close to each other that they were having to watch where they were paddling because they didn't want to like hit each other with the paddles or even be so close that they were touching their kayaks together. The idea was that if they were next to each other, they would appear to be too big and the crocodiles would lose interest in them as being a food source. Just a couple of days later, they had already had to create this formation several times. It is December 7th, and they're noticing a few smaller crocs leap into the water, and so they move close together again because they know that crocodiles use this muddy, murky water to camouflage themselves before lunging at their prey. So they are in this tight formation and just kind of paddling at a normal pace, and then something happens. So fast and so smooth that it takes a moment for their minds to process what the heck just occurred. There was a yell, something along the lines of, "Oh my God," was shouted. There was a splash of water, and all at the same time, Henry's kayak flipped over. Chris and Ben witnessed as the biggest crocodile they had ever seen launched itself perfectly out of the water, bit down on Henry's left shoulder, and pulled him under. It happened so fast that even though Ben and Chris were right there next to Henry, they didn't have the time to do anything. Henry would never come back to the surface of the water, and his body was never located. Ben and Chris paddled away to safety in a nearby village, which was Kabeya Maji, where when they got there, they were so frantic that the villagers ran away from them because they were just looking and behaving like clearly indicating that something was wrong. But Chris and Ben then used their arms to make like the crocodile biting motion. And after this, the villagers understood why they were acting so insane coming out of the water. The villagers here had actually had so many run-ins with crocodiles that they gave up water travel due to this exact same thing happening. A crocodile would leap up out of the water, snatch a person, and then take them to the bottom of the river where that person would never be seen again. Since 2006, until they stopped boating, 6 people died this way. 20 minutes later, several hundred people stood on the banks of the river and congregated over the bridge that crossed the Lukuga River. They pointed grimly as Henry's kayak came into view and then quietly, passively floated along with the current. It was like he simply was plucked out of it and that he would be coming along any second. There was no indication on his kayak or on his gear of the tragedy that just occurred. It was a silent message. I was here, and now I am gone. To commemorate his love for the rapids, on January 7th, 2011, 200 of Henry's closest friends came together where they had a wooden kayak dedicated to him. Each of them spent a few minutes writing something to him on the kayak before they set it on fire and allowed it to float into the Atanda Falls. Henry was an avid writer, putting his thoughts on paper, which would later become a book called Living the Best Day Ever. In a way, Henry wrote his legacy in 3 sentences. Quote, I need to believe that there is more to this world than what we know. I need to believe there is magic out there. I cannot believe these things blindly, though, and maybe this is why I have to do this mission, to prove to myself that we can do things that are bigger than ourselves. And I hope you take that with you wherever you go. Sources for this episode include Wild Whisper Africa, faunaflora.org, earth.org, the Natural History Museum, hometoafrica.com, nps.gov, Longdon to Cape, and Outside Online. Thank you so much for listening this week. Be sure to check out our Patreon, Spotify, and Apple subscriptions for next week's episode. As I record this, voting is happening on Patreon for what story you are going to get to hear. You can find the link in the episode description if you want to participate in that as well. Again, thank you so much for being here. We will talk again soon. Bye. What is life without close calls with disaster? Thank you for listening. Don't forget to follow the podcast to be the first to hear the now weekly episodes. Join our subscription on Patreon, Apple, or Spotify today and immerse yourself in the haunting beauty of the great outdoors. For around $4 a month, you'll get exclusive access to the first episode of each month and early access to all other episodes, showcasing the morbid and mysterious side of nature. Please reach out with story requests, and if you have your own story, please email tragedywithaview @gmail.com for a chance to have your story featured on a later episode. Again, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.